Howdy YouTube pards. This is Jack Spade here, coming to you from High Noon Leatherworks, where we're going to show you step by step how to create leather goods from patterns all the way to the finished product. Stay tuned. Howdy YouTube pards. Welcome back to High Noon Leatherworks, where this is episode 4 of making an 1800s double loop holster. So episode 1 was cutting the pattern. Episode 2 is cutting the leather. Episode 3 we did some beveling, and we also did some grooving. My grooving in episode 3 was to put in my stitch line, so I knew exactly where I was going to stitch the holster after I folded it over. So episode 4, today we're going to do some decorative grooving using the grooving tool that I used in episode 3. Again, I got that at Tandy. Tandy makes good quality tools. They seem to last. And then we're going to do some burnishing. And I'll use this burnishing tool, and I'll show it a little closer here once we get burnishing, where it depends on the thickness of your leather which groove you want to use. So we'll go ahead and adjust our tool and we'll get started. Okay, I pulled you in here a little closer so you can actually see what I'm doing as I'm doing some of this decorative grooving. Again, I've got my groove in for my stitch line, and now I'm going to adjust my grooving tool. Use a little small precision screwdriver. It just has a little locking screw at the end so you can adjust this in and out. And then I'm going to take a look at my 1800s holster as a pattern of where to set this. You can always look at pictures and go off of original historic pictures, or however you want to do it, or if you're just doing one for yourself and you're not that particular about whether it's accurate, time accurate, or period correct, then that's up to you. And I'll tighten that down. Make sure it's good and snug, because the last thing is you don't want it moving on you. So I'm going to start with the skirt down here, and this will be folded over like that and through the loops. So I really don't need to go back behind this holster. This is going to be a lot of extra work that nobody's ever going to see. So I'll probably start just here on the skirt and work my way around to the other side and come up to about the same position on the other side. So I'll open this back up. I know where I want to start. And remember, as I said in episode 3, you want to make sure you keep that round edge of your grooving tool right against the edge of your leather. So go a little slower. Make sure that you're always on the edge of that leather, because you got a lot of curves and a lot of bends. You don't want that moving on you. And again, you can stop. You can turn your leather. Makes it easier for you. And then as you start, put a little pressure down on your leather again. Spin it a little more. Try to keep it as in a comfortable position as you possibly can. Seems like it does make it a little tougher if you're trying to videotape it. And then there's the leather that I grooved out of it. Here's some here, it fell out on the back side. It doesn't really take a whole lot to make a little groove. Now, what I'll do is I like to kind of give, on a decorative, I like to kind of give a double, about 1/8 of an inch, maybe not quite 1/8 of an inch away from each other. And what that does is it gives me two sides from that 1/8 of an inch or whatever measurement you want. It gives me two sides to put some decorative stamping. So I'm going to go in, loosen up my tool again, and I'm going to reset it. I'm going to reset the depth. Now, when you do this, it is very important on your second, if you're going to do a second groove for your decorative, it's very, very important that you go slow and that you don't make any mistakes, because what will happen is, with that being a double groove, it'll really be pronounced if there's a mistake, because it'll really show up between the grooves that you make. And remember that we're going to kind of use that as a decorative line to put our stamping. So we want to make sure that we start right next to where we started the first groove, and we're going to continue following the edge of our leather with the edge of our tool. And again, we can move our leather, keep us comfortable. That's the thing. You want to stay comfortable, not have to move your body, get up, move. It's much better to move the leather. And you can see it's just following the other groove that I put in there. And the reason why I said you want to go slow and be super careful on the second one is, boy, if you slip and make a mistake now, you could cut right through the first groove that you made, and make quite a mess. So you got to be really careful. I just like to go a little bit slower the second time. Now I've got two grooves, two decorative grooves, and then I've got this piece of leather in the middle of those. So in between those decorative grooves, I got this piece of leather. So it looks like it's raised up now. And then again, that's going to give me a guide to go around and do some stamping. I think that's enough. Yeah, it tucks up underneath the back of the holster when you fold it over, so you're going to be able to see the stamping on it okay, but you're not going to, you didn't need to go any further to do any extra work, because nobody's going to see that back there. Now I'm going to do the same thing on the front of the holster, and what I like to do on that is I like to fold my holster over to where I'm going to sew it, and then I'll take a pointed object, not necessarily sharp, but it is pointed. And I'll just make a small little mark right on the front side of the holster before it rounds over into the fold right here. And then you'll notice I've got a line down here where I've grooved, and that's going to be sewn. So I don't really want to go into that grooved line for decorative. I want to kind of stay away from that. So I want to kind of come up a little bit from that line. Oh, I'm going to go approximately 3/16 of an inch or so. Probably ought to go a little bit more because of my stamping. It'll give me a lot more room to stamp. So I'll probably go up about 1/4 of an inch from that line. And I'll make another little mark. Now I'm making these marks with this pointed object. I'm making them very, very, very faint and small. I know where they're at. I'm the one that put them there. But what that does is that gives me a reference point to lay a straight edge. So I like to do a straight edge down this fold, and I can do that with my ruler or my straight edge of any kind and my grooving tool. So again, I can take my grooving tool, and where the sharp side is, that's the beveled side, I could start where I made my mark, and I'm just going to groove a straight line up to where I made my second mark. Again, at the end of your groove, you can kind of give it a twist and lift up on it, and that cuts the leather off so it doesn't leave a little tag on there. But now you can see I've got this nice straight line grooved in there, and that's right on the fold, or above the fold. It's on the front of the fold. So that's going to give me a nice straight line to do some stamping on. Now what I'll do to do my decorative line is I'll follow that, and I'll probably have to reset my tool again, but I will follow that all the way around, even up here at the top this time. Notice my stitching line doesn't go all the way around because I'm not going to stitch here. That's where the gun slides in. So I stop my stitching line here, but my decorative grooving will go all the way around. So this gets a little tedious because you got to go around some of these real sharp turns, and sometimes you really have to kind of think ahead as you're getting close to those turns, because you don't want to just go around it. You may want to come to a point, and that's what I'm going to do up here. I'm going to actually bring this to a point instead of trying to round that sharp corner, and you'll see that here in a second. So I'll have to reset my tool. I'll lock it down, and then once I lock it down, I can go ahead, double check it. You always double check it once you lock it down to make sure it is going to stay where you measured it. This looks pretty good. So I'll kind of go around and just get a look and see if that's what I want before I actually start grooving, because I don't want to put a groove in the leather and then go, well, I wish I would have done this or done that. So what I'll do is I'll just kind of take a few little points and reference them, and then I'll go ahead back, and if that's what I want, I'll go ahead and I'll start my grooving. Now remember, this is a decorative groove, but I want to stay as consistent around that edge as possible. Because I do have a stitch line. So I'll come up, follow my stitch line. Here's where it gets a little tricky. You want to make sure you don't go too far, because you don't want to cross over or have two grooves crossing over one another. You want them to actually meet. So I'll bring it up, stop that one, turn my piece, and come over here and see how I did. And I went just a hair too far. But I can bring that up to a point. And then what I do is start going around the top. And that meets my start of my straight edge mark or groove up here. I started down here at the bottom and then I stopped at that one. So I do have a little tiny piece there, and I can take a knife and carefully cut that little piece off there, get it out of there. Again, this is a decorative groove. It's not going to have any stitches in it, but I still don't want that small piece of leather there at the end sticking out. So there's my first one. And then I want to do the same thing that I did back here on the skirt. I want to make a second decorative groove, and I'm going to go on the inside, because remember when I folded this over and I made my straight line, I made it on this side of the fold. Here's your fold, and I made the line on this side so you could actually see it. So I want to come on the inside of that line. I don't want to go to the outside, because remember my stitch line is to the outside. So I'm going to go to the inside. That means I need to readjust my tool again. And as you can tell, the tool's starting to get pretty wide from the cutting edge over to your guide edge of the tool. Now, it's my opinion that the further you pull this out to groove, the harder it is to groove. I think the closer it is to the tool, the cutting edge is to the tool, the easier it is to groove. Again, that's my opinion. So this time, instead of starting with the straight line, I'm going to actually start with my grooving tool down here where I started before, come all the way around, and then I'll connect those 2 points with a straight edge. And then I'll start from the straight line. I'll start away from it the same width, approximately the same width that I have my tool set. Again, I think the key to a good grooving job is to make sure that you go slow. I think the key is slow and steady. So you can really follow the contours of the outside of that holster. And when I get up to this point, I'm going to stop when I feel like I'm right in the middle. So when I feel like I'm right in the middle of those two lines, my first groove lines, that's when I'm going to stop. That'll make my second point. Then I can turn it around and I can continue from there. If I need to, I can go up a little bit and start my groove line. But you want to make sure you always stop right there in the center of those two lines. And remember, when I get to the end here, I want to stop short. Don't go all the way to your first line, because I'm going to groove another straight line there. That's the same distance away from this first line as these lines are from each other. And then try not, it's a little difficult, you kind of have to put the pressure to the left of your tool on the cutting part, because you don't want to push down when you're doing the straight edge on your tool itself, your guide of the tool, because it'll make a mark on your back side of your leather. You don't want to do that, because there's no way of getting that out of there once it's in there. So we've got our decorative grooves done on our skirt. We've got our decorative grooves done over here on the holster part. So that gives you an idea. Once that gets put into those, gets sewn and put into those double loops, so when we do some stamping next time, you'll be able to see how this all comes together, and it'll be beautiful. So you want to make sure you stay tuned for that. Now, the second part of today is that we want to do some burnishing. I said in episode 3 we were going to do some burnishing and never got to it. Got so busy on beveling and grooving that we never got to the burnishing. So that's what we're going to do today as the second part of this episode. So the way I like to do it, people do it all different kinds of ways, is I like to just take regular tap water and a sponge, and I wring it out somewhat. I don't want it dripping wet, because you don't want it dripping down the face of your leather. And then what I'll do is this is called casing. I'll case the edge of my leather with water. Again, this is just tap water, but I'll get that wet, but not too wet. I'll just dampen it, just enough to get it moist. Again, I don't want it soaking into the rest of my leather or running down the face of your leather, because it can discolor it. So you want to be very careful about that. So that's why I said you can always add more water to your sponge if you need to. But if it's too wet and it starts dripping all down the face of your, on the edges, is not a huge problem. But if it starts dripping down the face of your leather, it's going to make some, it's kind of hard to get rid of that, because what it does is it kind of two-tones your leather, and then it may affect how it takes your dye or your stain, depending on what you use. So you got to be very careful with that. Now, once I get that moist, I'll let it set for just a second, let that soak into the edge. I don't want to burnish while it's super wet. And what that'll do is some people use beeswax on burnishing, which it works fine. I've got beeswax. I've used it before. I kind of like this so I can burnish before I add my dyes, and it takes dye real well. But then also it allows me to touch up burnish once I'm done sewing and finishing touches. So that's why I like the water. So what I'll do is I'm gonna take my tool out of my homemade holster there, and you have different grooves in these burnishing tools. I like to get this where it's comfortable, and you'll notice, I don't know if you can see it or not, but this wider groove is the one that I've used the most. You can tell by looking at it. Now you might think, well, your leather's not that thick compared to that groove. Well, what you have to remember is if I use a narrower groove in the burnishing tool, it's not going to get the round edge effect. It'll only try to get that point. So using the larger opening, and I'm not pushing very hard at all. I'm just repeating that motion to make sure that I get a good smooth surface, and it gets shiny, and it almost makes it look I don't know, like plastic, or it gets shiny. And what that does is it's going to harden that edge, and it's going to help protect that edge. And it's going to give you a very finished look. Again, I'm not rubbing hard. It's more of a speed thing than it is a pressure. I've seen guys use makeshift burnishing tools in a drill, cordless drill, and again, it works. I've tried it with cabinet knobs, work great, but it doesn't. It's not all about pressure. It's more about the speed in which you do your burnishing. You can see it just leaves a real nice shiny edge. I hope you can see that on the camera. And then you just continue your way around. Sometimes the hardest part of burnishing is supporting the leather as you burnish. I like to try to use longer strokes burnishing if I can. Sometimes you can't because of curves and rounded corners. That's slicking that up real nice. If you try to press hard on it while you're doing it, if you're trying to use more pressure than you are speed, because the speed is what heats that up and gives it that slick appearance. If you use a lot of pressure, what you'll do is you'll just mash your leather down, and then actually what I found is it becomes harder to work with when you do that. Now I'm onto the skirt, and you can see where the straps are cut, so it's not very stable right there. So you may have to try holding it a couple of different ways to get a good grip on it. Yeah, this is burnishing real nice. And then I'm going to turn it around, go back to where I started, and then go the other direction. And you can just watch it as you're burnishing it. You can just watch it start to appear a little darker and slick and a little shiny. Now, this point on this burnishing tool, see this? I come to this point where my holster is going to fold over right there. That's where this comes in handy. So I can get down real close to that edge right there. You want to try to refrain from doing this across the leather. That'll kind of flatten your leather out. And then I'll go back to my rounded edge again, my groove. And I'll tell you what, the speed, if you can control not trying to push too hard, the speed's doesn't really take a huge toll on your arm or your wrist. It's when you catch yourself trying to put way too much pressure on it, then that really, it'll wear you out fast. You know, I'm on a more stable portion. I'm over on the front of the holster part now, on a stable portion of the leather, and much easier to burnish. Now I get up here to more unstable portion, this flat, where it comes to a point on the top of the holster. I'll have to just make adjustments on how I'm going to hold that as I do my burnishing. Now around that corner, again, notice how I hold it, totally different. If I was pushing too hard at this point, instead of using the speed or the heat of the burnishing tool, I'd start bending this point over. So you want to be very careful not to do that. Then I'll come around the edge. That's burnishing very nice. Alright, and like I said, you could check it just by running your thumb across it, taking a look visually. You can see it when you get a good burnish on it. But if you run your thumb across it, it's nice and slick. Getting down here toward the end where I started. And if you have a huge piece that you're burnishing and you're like, man, it seems like I might need some more moisture on that, you can do that. You can add a little more. I try not to, but sometimes, you know, if you get busy, you get called away for a few minutes or something, maybe the edge does dry out too much. You don't have enough moisture, so you might want to add some. I'm going to come around the corner there of the skirt, and I'm now meeting up with where I started from. So you take a look. I've went all the way around. Have a beautifully rounded, hard, slick edge now. So that's using the burnishing tool. So next time when we come back, episode 5, we'll start doing some decorative stamping on this and get that wrapped up, and I'll show you how we'll do that, and then it'll really be coming together. So as you can see, after our grooving and our burnishing, we're starting to get a little bit of a design going on there. So we add that stamping in episode 5, it'll look really sharp. So come on back to episode 5, where we'll go through some stamping and this thing will really start coming together. You can see, even with the decorative grooving, it's starting to look pretty nice. So episode 5, we'll get into some stamping, and I'll see you then. Thanks a lot.